It's been a year since squalid living conditions pushed the First Nations community of Attawapiskat to the top of the national agenda. You'll remember the pictures that were very shocking. More than 24 families lived in temporary shelters, some without insulation or plumbing. The community had declared a state of emergency 1 month before because of living conditions. And the controversy didn't end there. The federal government sent a third-party manager to the community to help, who was later removed, but it also paid for 22 new mobile homes that were just upgraded. And a new school is slated to be built next year. But the chief of Attawapiskat says her community is still facing a housing shortage. So has enough been done to make sure Attawapiskat doesn't end up in another crisis? Joining me now in studio is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs, Greg Rickford. In Cobalt, Ontario, is NDP MP Charlie Angus. His riding includes Attawapiskat. And in Toronto, Liberal MP John McKay. Thanks for joining me today, gentlemen.
Nice
Appreciate your time.
Hi, Anna.
Now, Mr. Rickford, I want to start with you. After a year later, how have things improved in Attawapiskat from the government's point of view?
Well, I think two words, overall better and certainly positive in two important regards. First of all, with respect to the crisis, of course, we had a three-point plan that dealt with some very urgent short-term supplies. Second point was to provide safe, warm housing for a period of time until the third point, which was to bring in housing units. That was a logistical exercise of an order of magnitude that was quite remarkable. 22 homes moved up on the winter roads, which for any northerners to understand, there's right-of-way things that have to go on because these are wide loads. And so we worked effectively on the ground to bring those homes in. And in that regard, we're very pleased. Second thing is that we're moving forward on some key infrastructure projects. Construction underway with the school, a K-8 5,800 square meter school, which is providing some jobs in the community and some inspiration for the children. We have some soil remediation work on the go in the community as well, and we're working on the continuing to build on the water infrastructure, the capacity, modernization of their distribution system, and importantly, one of the things that we place a great emphasis on is training, having certified operators. So there's a lot of work being done in partnership, shared key priorities moving forward. So I would say overall better and positive.
I want to bring in Charlie Angus now. We've reached you via Skype in your Northern Ontario riding today. Now, a year after the crisis received national attention, how do you feel Attawapiskat is doing?
I think there's certainly things that have improved in terms of, thank God we're finally getting a school. I mean, this has been a community that's been without a school for 12 years. It'll be almost 14 years by the time the school is open. Anywhere else, that would be unbelievable. Those trailers made a huge difference, life and death. So certainly, when I talk to the kids in the community who are living in tents who now have some trailers, they're very, very thankful. However, I think the issue is that this was a real moment for Canada. I think it shocked a lot of Canadians. I've had, in my region, probably 13 states of emergency declared in the last 7 years, half of them because of the infrastructure collapse in communities. Unfortunately, I still feel we're treading water. We're still in a situation where we respond to the immediate crisis, but not the long-term planning. We were looking to get 30 new homes built last summer through a rent-to-own program with banks. That fell through because the government didn't sign off on the loan guarantees. So we still have people living in the construction trailer. We still have massively overcrowded homes. So I think Canadians are looking and saying, where's the long-term solution? How are we actually going to learn some lessons from Attawapiskat and all of us? You know, whatever political divide, sit down and say, we need to find more sustainable solutions, and we need to find a way to ensure that we're not always responding to, the house burning down at the last minute.
Now, Charlie, last month, Attawapiskat Chief Teresa Spence accepted the government's offer to work with the community to develop a long-term housing strategy for trailers now in place. This sounds like a step in the right direction?
Yeah, I think the community, what always amazes me is the hopefulness, the willingness always to say, let's move ahead. But we're seeing this in many of our communities where the infrastructure issues are still very daunting. And sometimes it takes a crisis like, unfortunately, what happened last winter to wake Canadians up. What I've heard from people is, let's fix this. How could a country as rich as ours have so many failed and broken communities with, unsafe drinking water, over 39% high risk, so many communities without schools. Again, in James Bay alone, and just in the last 4 years, I've had at least half a dozen states of emergency, from complete sewage collapse, from poisoned water, from people living in tents. We can do a lot better than this.
Now, John McKay, what's your response? Has the government done enough to make sure Attawapiskat doesn't end up in another crisis?
Well, Attawapiskat is, if you will, a tiny tip of a very, very large iceberg. And while there may be some local success, I don't know that moving trailers and tents is a great success. Bear in mind that there are literally dozens and dozens and dozens of communities across the country who have both housing and water crisis, and regrettably, the government's first reaction to this crisis in Attawapiskat was to sue, to replace with a third-party manager. And so the community ended up diverting all its energies into the lawsuit. The lawsuit got settled in the community's favor, and in some respects, it was a perfect lawsuit for this government. If we win, you lose, and if we lose, you still lose. And that's regrettable, because the government abandoned Kelowna back when it first became the government, and that was a historic coming together of all of the First Nations, all of the provinces, all of and the federal government. There was real money on the table and real enthusiasm to actually try to tackle these what some might well describe as intractable problems. And it takes place in what I have to note is an ironical atmosphere, which is the celebration of the War of 1812. And any fair reading of the War of 1812 says that, well, the Canadians didn't win, the Americans didn't win, the British didn't win, but the Indians, as they were then called, did win. And so here we have a government celebrating a war where the Indians, as they were then called, actually lost. And I just find that the metaphor is a bit distressing.
I want to bring in Mr. Rickford on the third-party manager. Last summer, a federal court judge ruled that the government was unreasonable to appoint a third-party manager. Has the government reimbursed the community for the cost of that?
Well, the process, obviously, we respectfully, disagree with the decision of the court to the extent that there was pressing health and safety concerns for the community. And we put a 3-point plan in that I mentioned. And notably, we removed the third-party manager as soon as we had achieved those 3 specific goals.
Reimbursing the costs, though?
Well, the cost is a function of what the judge assigns in the case. I'm not going to comment on the details of the case. We've already gone to the War of 1812. So just focusing on the more important issue, and that is that the third-party manager was put in place to ensure that we were dealing responsibly with Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development departmental spending, and focusing on the actual 3 points of addressing this crisis. And to that end, I think we would all agree. If I could just add one more remark with respect to the Kelowna Accord, and I think this is something that I would be in agreement with Charlie, or Charlie would agree with me, is that notably, this was a document that was put in place roughly a month and a half before after 13 years of Liberal government. What we do know since then, when you start to talk about major infrastructure, particularly water and sewer, is that we've needed to take a full consultative partnership approach with AFN leadership, consult from coast to coast to coast with technical experts, community members, and leadership at the community level, and come up with an important 3-point plan. Training, the ability to have the capacity to operate, maintain, and monitor facilities in communities. Continue with an objective and prioritized list for water and wastewater treatment. And then finally, a piece of legislation which reconciles a legal vacuum that there are no standards per se on the reserve. So we're working towards those goals. That's a mid to long-term solution, but we are working on all of those fronts right now.
And when we work on a long-term solution, I want to pick up on something that
Sure.
Charlie Angus mentioned. When it comes to those 30 new homes, all those 30 new homes needed was a sign-off from the government on the loan guarantee.
Yeah.
Why not sign off on that loan guarantee?
That's actually not true with respect. We had asked the community to put forward a housing strategy. We're very hopeful that that will be forthcoming. The chief obviously signaled a couple of weeks ago that she's interested in that long-term solution for the housing. The reality of it is that the lots for any of those 30 homes haven't even been cleared and are not serviced. So we have a couple of preemptive issues to deal with, and we hope and we believe that through a housing strategy, which the community is to put together, because they drive this process. We want them exercising their governance, their sense of self-governance over these issues, taking responsibility for them. And I think what you're seeing is a strong commitment in the three other areas that I mentioned earlier with respect to what we're doing, that we're hopeful things are going to stay positive and continue to be cooperative.
Charlie Angus, going forward, what needs to happen to address the needs of struggling Aboriginal communities, not just this one, but even the other ones you were mentioning, the 13 others that have declared states of emergencies and others that need specific items?
Well, I mentioned 13 states of emergency. That's what I was referring to. Well, I keep hearing about a 3-point plan, but I don't hear the fourth point, which is where's the infrastructure dollars. With respect to the 30 homes in Attawapiskat, we had an agreement through CMHC because contrary to the claims that had been made last winter by the government, by the Prime Minister, by the Indian Affairs Minister, Attawapiskat had a credit rating, so we could actually get the finances to get those houses through rent-to-own. That would have gone a long way. But, you know, at this point, what we need is if people actually sitting down and saying we've got to work through this, simply making the legal framework about water. I mean, I was pushing for that in 2005. It's happening because the former Liberal government, there was a complete vacuum. However, to deal with the infrastructure crisis, we need to see serious capital dollars, and that's the missing element. The capital dollars and the long-term planning. So we're not just putting cheap, crappy homes into these communities. We're actually starting to look at sustainable houses, sustainable energy systems, because things are built and they start to fall apart.
Okay, gentlemen, Greg Rickford, Charlie Angus, and John McKay, I want to thank you for coming in and keeping us up to date on this important issue.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Coming up on Power and Politics, how wide is the Elections Canada investigation into the robocalls affair?